You're listening to Dirty Feet, a podcast from No More Radio.
Vous écoutez le podcast Dirty Feet sur les ondes de No More Radio.
Hosted by,
animé par
Allison Burns,
JD Papillon,
et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
Stay tuned.
We're gonna move you.
This is a very special episode of the Dirty Feet podcast. Back on January 16th, 2014, there was a symposium held by the Bouge Dance Festival. It was facilitated by Tim Rodrigues on behalf of the Bouge Festival and hosted at Mainline Theatre. This is, of course, a recording of that conversation. Please excuse the sound quality. This conversation took place in the lobby at Mainline Theatre right before one of the common space showcases as part of the festival. The participants will introduce themselves in just a moment. The topic of conversation was the unspoken contract between a choreographer and their audience. So I'm going to turn it over now to Amy Blackmore, the artistic director of the Bouge DC Festival.
Welcome to our first Bouge d'ici Symposium. Bienvenue à la première Symposium de Bouge d'ici. C'est quelque chose qu'on voulait faire depuis longtemps. It's something that we've been wanting to do for a while. You know, we casually talk about dance with friends, but you know, we thought let's get new friends, get together, talk a little more, expand our knowledge. Alors, c'est une rencontre entre amis et aussi entre d'autres mondes dans la communauté. Je suis très contente. Je vois, il y a quelqu'un ici que je connais pas du tout. We don't know each other, so that's really cool. And Tim Rodrigues, right here, approached us with this idea of doing a symposiums at the festival. And Tim, thank you so much for bringing it up. We really appreciate it. And yeah, so you're going to be facilitating tonight.
Yes.
I'm wondering if before we start, peut-être avant qu'on commence, on peut juste nous introduire. I think it might be good to know who we are, that kind of thing. If we could just go around in a circle, is that okay?
That's perfect.
Right on. Well, I'll start. So yeah, my name is Amy. I'm the artistic director of Bouge d'ici. Je suis gérant de la salle ici, le Théâtre Mainline et du Festival Fringe. Et j'ai étudié danse à Concordia, and have lots of thoughts about dance. Yeah, that's me.
I'm Tim Rodrigues, lighting designer, technician, production manager, dance artist, and dance nerd as well. Yeah.
My name is Dominic Purcell, the general manager of Bouge DC. I also moonlight as a producer of other kinds of shows, but my day job is in the paper world. That's a businessman, and I love dance, so I'm here as a layperson.
My name is Maria Simone. Primarily dance teacher, interpreter. Getting more and more interested in dramaturgy and rehearsal directing. And yeah, I'm interested to see what we bring to the table.
Moi, c'est Danny Desjardins, je suis interprète et chorégraphe. Puis je suis... En fait, j'ai eu l'invitation de Tim, puis là, je suis actuellement sur le travail d'un solo. Puis ça fait plusieurs fois que j'essaie de voir ce rapport-là avec le public, puis je trouve ça intéressant comme sujet, puis ça m'intriguait, fait que j'avais envie de venir voir ce que nous avions à partager ensemble.
My name is Holly Greco. I'm one of the production managers for Bouge DC Festival, and I've been around the festival for the last 5-6 years. I also graduated from Concordia in contemporary dance. I've had experience working a lot at a school in dance theater with comedy and the absurd, etc., etc. I'm also a dance teacher, and I have a passion for mentoring and rehearsal directing.
I'm Alison Burns. I love talking about dance. I run the Dirty Feet podcast, where we talk about dance every week. I also choreograph and perform myself. Yeah.
Alison, thank you so much for recording today. Dirty Feet, awesome, all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. Here's how we're going to start. Choreographer has an idea. Go through the entire process of casting and creating and recasting and research and all of that, and the show's finally ready to open. There's an audience member out there. They decide that they've heard about this piece through the paper or through Facebook or through friends or because they know somebody, and they decide to go and they sit down. Piece is about to start. The audience member is open. This is where the contract really starts. I'd like to explore the difference between, not the difference, but where choreographic intentions and audience expectations meet. Where in the middle do they meet? Because not every choreographer has an ideal audience. Some do. They know exactly who they want to create for. Some are just happy to go through the research and to create a finished work that brings them to another level as an artist personally. Some artists really prefer to open their lives and their work up for public consumption, to make their work quote unquote accessible so that anybody can come in and watch it. Some audience members like to be challenged. They like to sit and take in the work and not necessarily have all the cues for what they're seeing. They don't want to be spoon-fed. Some audience members would rather just see things that are pleasing to the eye, rhythmically enjoyable. With these different views, we often find ourselves sitting with these different views. Everybody goes into a dance show with different intentions. So there's a couple questions that I would want to put out. The first one would be for the creators. It would be, whom is an ideal audience member for your work? Or do you even have one? Is it necessary? I will go a little bit further as to say, if you were to, as Danny's, you're saying your work that you're working on right now, this relationship between your work and the audience is something that is playing into your creation.
C'est quelque chose que j'aimerais vraiment qui se passe. Puis c'est justement le questionnement après ça. Tu sais, justement, est-ce que je veux plaire? Est-ce que je veux faire mon affaire? Est-ce que je prends en ligne de compte que mon travail peut être accessible ou pas? Tu sais, je veux dire, ça peut être des questionnements, mais je veux pas rentrer dans ces questionnements-là. Puis je veux juste me demander, est-ce que c'est possible de faire un show où que justement t'arrives, le show commence, puis tu crées ce sentiment d'union-là avec le public puis toi, puis voir si c'est possible de jammer tout le long par rapport à comment tu sens que le public est en ce moment, tu sais. Si le public veut, tu sais, est-ce que tu peux vraiment ressentir que le public veut voir quelque chose d'accessible, est-ce qu'il veut voir quelque chose, est-ce qu'il veut être choqué, est-ce qu'il veut, tu sais, puis essayer de voir à chaque soir qu'est-ce que le public veut ressentir, mettons, puis de le faire ou de pas le faire, là, mais c'est un petit peu ésotérique, mais c'est quand même...
It's funny because it's almost something that comedians do. Like, they can feel their audience as it goes, as a show progresses, or like an improviser, right? You know, comedians have lots of materials, and improvisers can go with the vibe of the dancers around them. But, you know, it's an interesting question. Like, how would you put a show together like that? I don't know.
J'ai une question à suivre. Une fois que tu crées un projet, tu as fait la chorégraphie, puis tu le présentes devant un public ou une audience, rendu à ce point-là, comment est-ce que tu réagis si tu vois que l'audience ou les spectateurs ne réagissent pas? Comment est-ce que tu le changes une fois que c'est déjà créé d'une soirée à l'autre? Comme tu vois que c'est un public moins informé qui veut juste... Comment est-ce que tu fais le changement? Ou est-ce que tu fais un changement? Ou est-ce que tu changes pour le prochain show? Comme si tu vois que le run du show, comme il réagit pas avec le public, c'est-tu... So my question was so you've got a show, you've done a choreography, and you've put together a show, and it's designed for audience A, but it just turns out that audience B is coming to your show. How do you change the mood to your show to cater it to audience B so that you continue to fill seats? Or
how do you know that audience B is coming?
The question is, if on night one you realize, okay, audience B is here instead of audience A, can you change your choreography? Is it something you can, like it's...
Ça dépend aussi, si toi t'es l'interprète, sur scène, je pense que tu as un pouvoir un peu plus... Tu peux plus faire qu'est-ce que tu veux parce que tu fais comme, OK, ça marche pas. Tu peux mettre un petit peu plus de crunchy ou tu vas y aller plus slow, mais si c'est d'autres interprètes, là, tu n'as pas de pouvoir, puis après ça, tu peux transmettre à tes interprètes, OK, cette partie-là, peut-être tied it up, puis cette partie-là, loosen it up. Tu peux réarranger ou tu peux comme...
It's something that happens on the fly, you know? In the moment, when you're on stage in that moment, you feel it because what you're getting back from the audience. It's like, I'm sure some of us have had this, where if you're performing for a matinee, you know right away it's going to be a harder audience because it's the time of day, and where they're at in their day and their energy really affects how the piece plays out. So it's not so much that the choreography is changing; it's that the energy behind things, or the timing, or what's hitting with the audience. You go harder on those ones, and
I was just thinking that I think it also depends on where in their career a choreographer is, and if they don't recognize it, they subconsciously know what type of people and what age group and what kind of, like, if critics are coming, so they in a way gear their work with that sort of
the stage 2, the end placement where the show's going to be. Can tell a bit.
Exactly. Are you going to have critics? Are you going to have are these people that are going to further your career, or are they close friends and it's a sort of more relaxed setting?
Right. Yeah. This is actually, how much does somebody's mood affect how they take in a performance? As the layman, when you're in a good mood, are you more open for a performance? Do you censor yourself from seeing a show if you're not in a good mood? Like, how much about how you're feeling when you sit in the seat, how does that affect how you take in the work? Because can you take in, let's say, a more edgy or risky piece when you've had a bad day? Or do you have to be in a better mood so that you're more open or more relaxed in order to take in something that may not be a mainstream piece?
I guess it depends a lot on the type of edgy. I like edgy. But when you're tired, a show really has to be edgy to pull you and to wake you up. But there's something to be said for a classical piece as well, like something a little bit softer.
I find that. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just excited by the topic, but I find that I can be in a really bad mood walking into a show, and it will probably color the first 15 minutes of the performance for me. If the work is good, 15 minutes into it, I'm engaged in the work. Yeah. Like, if the work is good, it's going to grab me. If the work isn't good, I'll probably stay in that bad mood. So I find it really depends on the quality of the work, really.
Just to comment further.
Yeah.
In the representation of Common Space on January the 15th, 2014, for later dating, there's nobody that left that room like anything but ecstatic.
I don't know.
I saw some interested faces, some solemn faces. Some people were just hanging there watching, and as the shows were going on, the build was so strong, and it finished wonderfully, and people were awake, alert, sharp, and happy to be there. And it's a good show will do that.
That's also the fun thing about a compilation performance, right? Mm-hmm. When you have a compilation performance like that, or like shows that you see sometimes in dance schools, you know, the show can progress, and the curators can set it up in a way that they can guarantee that you're going to be in a good mood when you leave. And it's that's a place that I'm starting to get comfortable in. You know, I work for two festivals that have a really wide audience, the Fringe and Bouge DC, so the work is very diverse. So there's always something that everybody's going to like and something everybody's going to hate, but it's hard. Like, what do you do when it's your work, when it's 1 hour of you? That's like the other side of it, I guess.
To come back to the idea of what you alluded to about the first 15 minutes.
Yeah.
How important is the first 15 minutes in the creation of a piece? Pour la création, les premiers 15 minutes, like how important, what are you trying to establish in those first moments to grab the audience? Because it from a personal standpoint, the first 15 minutes or 5 minutes in a situation like a smaller work is very important to me as an audience member, because I need something. It's not the be all end all for how the piece is enjoyed, but there's the first hook, you know. So just the importance of that is something that can be explored, you know. That's where I'd like to go at this moment.
Ça me fait penser à le cinéma. Tu sais, en cinéma, la première partie, les premières 20 minutes, c'est là vraiment le setup pour le restant du film. It's sort of like the spoken truth of movies. The intro is done at the end of 20 minutes, and if you're not convinced, you're probably going to shut it off. Mais je sais pas c'est quoi en danse, you know.
Encore, je pense que ça dépend de l'intérêt que tu as par rapport à plaire ou à faire ton exploration personnelle. Mais, comme tu l'as dit, tu te dis hook, tu sais, parce que ça dépend, tu sais, tu peux hooker en donnant quelque chose de facile, tu sais, tu peux faire un début qui est facile, tu sais, qui va vraiment entrer en matière pour qu'après ça, tu t'amènes ton public dans le climax, ou tu peux arriver avec quelque chose d'hyper choquant, tu sais, puis tu gardes cette tension-là pendant 20 minutes, puis après 20 minutes, tu lâches la tension, puis là, le monde est juste comme « enfin, c'est fini », tu sais, puis là, t'es accroché, mais d'une façon violente, tu sais. Mais je trouve ce qui est important dans un show, c'est que dans ce 20 minutes-là, c'est juste de mettre le tone, tu sais. Parce qu'un show que tu regardes, puis tu es toujours en train de te poser des questions parce que tu connais pas le ton du show. Tu sais, c'est ça qui est tu sais, ça va être mal fait, bien fait, tu sais. Si le ton, tu le comprends, tu sais, au moins tu vas faire « Ah, j'ai pas aimé ça, mais j'ai pas aimé ça à cause de ça, tu sais. » Mais il y a des shows que tu vas voir, puis tu comprends pas pourquoi t'aimes pas ça, c'est juste parce que t'as pas compris le ton, tu sais. T'étais comme, c'était quoi le ton? C'était-tu une critique? C'était-tu un... Tu sais, voulais-tu mettre ça de l'avant ou il riait de ça? C'était-tu comme une joke? C'était-tu serious? It's just, you don't know. So I think it's the role of the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes, just to put the tone and, okay, that's what you're gonna see, or... I don't know.
This is where we're
going.
Yeah.
And
I think too, the more you have to keep asking yourself questions in your head while watching a piece, in a way distracts you from investing in it.
Yeah.
So if you're constantly having to kind of figure things out, like you were saying, you won't necessarily enjoy the piece as much as you would if you can just understand the tone and kind of like sit back and
after you can fuck it up.
That's it.
After 20 minutes, you can fuck up with the audience.
That's what I find is very very important in contemporary dance. When someone who's not familiar to the genre sits down and has no idea what they're expecting, other than they're going to be sitting there for, you know, X amount of time, 90 minutes, half hour, whatever, is exactly that, setting the tone at the beginning. I mean, either in a written form or whatnot, a little explanation, or the beginning. The beginning I find has to be a little bit more transparent for the person who's sitting there and who doesn't know exactly what's going on, or the backstory, or the raison d'être of the show. Like, why was this created? I don't know. I just came and I sat here because someone told me to come sit here, or, because I saw it on the poster. Setting the tone and setting the pace is very important in the beginning. I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by transparency?
C'est parce que la plupart des fois, quand t'es pas formé dans la danse, t'es pas danseur, t'es pas chorégraphe, c'est parfois difficile d'interpréter ce que les interprètes veulent te transmettre. C'est pas toujours transparent. Comme ça, d'être comme plus élaboré, d'être vraiment plus comme de prononcer les gestes, de vraiment je sais pas comment, c'est d'être plus prononcé, d'être plus descriptif avec ton corps pour bien transmettre le message. Dans les premières 5 minutes, OK, on parle de ça, on fait ça, le sujet est tel, parce que c'est très difficile quand t'es pas dans le genre de savoir exactement c'est quoi, sans une arrière-description ou quelque chose de ce genre. Mais si le ton est 7, dans les premières 5 minutes, si tu sais ce que tu fais, là tu comprends, puis l'arc, ça se suit très très bien.
As a performer, I think those first 15-20 minutes are building the trust of your audience. Whether or not they're there with you and they're quite understanding where you're going to go with it, it's selling what you're giving them, whether they understand what it is or not, or they're not quite there. You're building their trust to go, just let me take you there. We'll get
there. Good way to put it. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very simple idea when we sit and talk about these first 15 minutes, or what kind of a mood is an audience member in, or what is the choreographic intention for the audience. But it may be simple, but it's very important, and everybody's touching on things that are I don't think gets spoken about enough, because you can't order a dance piece on Netflix. You can't rent a dance DVD easily, at least. Mm-hmm. So it's something that happens very much in the moment. So these are things that are very very important to speak about. And I just wanted to say that because everybody's been making very very good points about the relationship. Is there a basic expectation that either side has for the other? Is there a basic expectation that a choreographer has for their audience? Like, do you go into your work thinking, as long as they get this one part, or as long as they enjoy this one, or they clap at that joke, I'm good? Or on the flip side of that, is there a basic expectation from an audience member? Do they need to be transported? Do they need to be lost in the movement, or would they rather just kind of be led through the journey on stage? Like, the audience side is a little bit more of a gray area, because they are already allowing themselves to be kind of taken for a ride just by sitting in the seat. But on the choreographic side, what is that basic need from the audience?
If I were a choreographer, the minimum expectation I would have from my audience, whether they liked it or hate it, would be to be respectful of the work. And if you absolutely hate it, at least give it the chance and to sit and hear or see what the entire work is, without being disrespectful to that choreographer.
And it's almost not even like it's almost not even saying that they have to be open. You want them to be open, but they have to be respectful.
Yeah. Unless it was something that was like extreme, someone's getting murdered, okay, it's a different story. But
I mean, because there are elements of choreography that really challenge the audience, that is going to challenge audience morals, viewpoints on social or political issues, even what they think dance, in quotation marks, actually is for them universally. Like constantly I mean, an audience member is pretty much asking to be challenged, but how far can you push that audience member in their comfort zone, and what, or is that even a goal for a choreographer? It might not necessarily be a goal for every choreographer, but is it for any of the choreographers in this room? Are you constantly trying to challenge your audience, or are you just creating work that kind of lives in its own world and it's to be experienced less so than confronted?
I think that I would like my audience to expect to have an experience rather than be entertained, because of the fact that it's not on the screen, because of the fact that they've taken the effort to come out, that I think I have to, whether or not acknowledge them, at least feel like they've had an experience and not just have seen something entertaining. That's my thought.
Sorry, go ahead, Katie.
I think as an audience member, my basic expectation of choreography is that it at least be well constructed.
Okay.
That you never make a lazy decision. Nobody puts even like 30 seconds on stage that doesn't belong there. So that in the interpretation of the work, in the construction, at least the effort has been made to make it cohesive, so that when I come, I'm not expecting to. If I'm expecting to see something in particular, I'm not seeing mostly that, and then like 30% not that I just liked this part, or not that the dancer just likes doing this, or not that this is just beautiful. I mean, sometimes I have problem with choreography that isn't rigorous in that way, and as the choreographer, I attempt to hold myself to that rigor, because I expect that people want that.
But how would you be able to tell that?
I think sometimes if I see a portion of a work that's aesthetically totally different than the rest of the work, or jarring. Sometimes when I go see work with people who don't have any experience, like background in dance, and they'll say to me after, they'll turn to me and be like, because they think it must work on some level, and they want to know what they missed about it. So they'll turn to me and they say, like, do you know in that part when she turns to him and then she hits him in the face, what's that about? It's like, I really have no idea. It seemed really out of context to me too. You know, I guess, I mean, it's certainly subjective. There's no like grading scheme, obviously. But once in a while, like if your interpreters are attempting to convey like emotions theatrically and they're not there, to me it's like you have to be rigorous enough to say this process is not working. My dancers are not actors. I need to either hire actors or hire an acting coach, or I need to do something because this acting sucks. And you know, or you need to bring somebody into your process who says that to you, or you know, things like that.
So that's very much an educated audience member's standpoint.
Yeah.
For audience members who have not had an extensive background in the creative process for choreography or for dance, they may not necessarily have that same standard, right?
Right, but I think that they do expect to understand the work. Like a lot of people I find expect to be like, I didn't get it, I didn't understand it. Okay. They expect to come into it and have some sort of intellectual takeaway. And when we're confusing in the construction of our work or in the interpretation of our work, we don't help them with that.
Okay, yeah.
I think that's my point.
I get that. That's a good point then, because that goes along with the question of, are you challenging your audience, or like Alex has said, she wanted them to have an experience. So how much of what you create in the studio that comes out of research and exploration, in the moment, at what moment in the process does the relationship with the audience come into play? Dans le processus, à quel moment les relations avec le public entre les processus?
Okay, dans le processus.
I think it should be considered from day one.
You mean like,
Person.
who am I doing this choreography for? Like you...
Well, if you have the intention of presenting it and you know where you're going to be presenting it, I think whether you know distinctly the market or whatever you're going for, you still kind of know in the background. If I was just a general public, this is what I at least get from it, or it gives to me.
I think that's assuming too that you're already programmed. How many choreographers realistically in this city are already programmed right off the bat, where most of us go into a space, now I shouldn't say most of us, I'm speaking now on my own process, and I've worked with you before. Our process is just start making movement and making movement happen, and whether you have an intention behind that, you have an image, I'm not going to go into all the different ways you can begin your creative process, but for me personally, I go and I make a movement vocabulary. I start to structure things, and a piece of work is starting to come through. Perhaps when I'm beginning to structure and I'm starting to see where I want to go with this piece of work, that's when I would bring in my audience. Because from rehearsal 1 through 5, I'm pretty much just fucking around the studio and seeing what sticks, if I can speak frankly. Which I just did. But that's the God honest truth for me. But I also worked with a choreographer. I worked with a company for a few years that his immediate vision was to fuck around with the audience, and went, all right, how can we do that? And that was the jumping point.
You know what's interesting about that perspective, though, is from an audience, from a non-choreographer perspective, you do want to be challenged to a certain degree. You want to be entertained, but you, at some point, as much as you want to understand the piece, from the minute it starts, you're always saying, okay, what's happening? You're watching a movie, you're trying to figure it out, you're watching a piece, and you're trying to figure out the movement. What's going on? Part of a good piece is also what lingers behind that makes you keep reconsidering the piece. Mm-hmm. So, fucking around with your audience sometimes at a on a thin line is nice. You get that lingering moment that that you don't quite understand. You saw, you made sense of it, and you want to know more. And then afterwards, you talk about it, and you talk about it, and you talk about it, and it becomes more than it was.
I always wished that I could be an audience member in the work that I was in, to see how I would feel it being done to me, because I've never really experienced that. I've worked with him, Patrick Lloyd Brennan, I've worked with him a number of times, number of different work, and it was very rare that I was an audience member, because I think I'd be really pissed, personally. But yeah, just on the flip side of that, I really don't know how my audience felt about it, which is kind of selfish, because I just did it and threw it at them and went, okay, bye, thank you. And obviously spoke about it with people afterwards, but even when people come up to you afterwards, sometimes you don't have an answer. As you say, like, what did that mean, Katie? When people talk to you, what did that mean? What did that mean? Even if you're in the work and you created the work, it's like, why did it have to mean something? Why can't I just propose something to you? And from there, you walk away with that, and you create your own meaning.
I find it interesting because I always have the audience in my mind when I'm making work, because I can't help it. And I don't know if it's because I'm a choreographer and also a producer, so I have a hard time separating those. Donc je trouve que mon travail qui est toujours le meilleur, c'est le travail que je fais quand je connais déjà c'est qui l'audience. Which is why I do a lot of contracts in musical theater, a lot of contracts, for regular theater and for film, because there's an expectation, you know what the audience is, and I find I can get really creative within that once I know.
I almost think that in a way the choreographer could be the first spectator.
Yeah.
Does that make
absolutely.
sense?
Yeah.
Because that's part of what was going through my head during this is, not every choreographer needs an audience, because sometimes it's just about what's being created in the studio if the choreographer is the first audience member. So there is that question of who is the audience, that the larger question really.
Who are you going to be a slave to while you're creating your work?
Yeah, are you a slave to your own challenges that you've set for yourself, or your own bullshit that you're carrying around, your baggage, things that you need to chase down, things that you're trying to accomplish? Or is it, are you a choreographer who is both blessed and cursed with having to constantly do the same thing in order to keep filling seats and keep getting grants? That's a whole other thing. Ça c'est une grosse défi dans le danse contemporaine, c'est the opposition of creating art and creating work that people pay to see, because not everybody wants to pay to see art, unfortunately. On a larger scale, it's not necessarily economical. That's probably not what I want to say, but it's hard to make a living at just choreography in contemporary dance for the reason of art versus commerce and where they clash.
What Amy was saying about being a producer and also a choreographer and how that affects her work makes me think also of a point I've heard recently about programmers in the city also being in charge of administration for their companies. So when they're programming work, they're not thinking about the artistic integrity of the work, they're thinking about what's selling. So the problem gets bigger.
That's where the ballet companies have it right, because you have an artistic director and then you have a general manager, and never the two shall meet, really. Yeah. It's the idea of being able to split, it's the idea of being able to split hats. I mean, this is a topic for, this could be a whole other topic on its own, but it does play into who your audience is, especially in the realm of contemporary dance. Yeah. If you look at an event like Piss in the Pool, they know who their audience is. If you look at something like the Nutcracker, they know who their audience is. But something like Bouge d'ici, we're still learning who our audience is, and our audience changes because our performers and our choreographers keep changing. So we keep getting a new audience, and we're trying to work on the bring back, on how to get them back, how to keep putting butts in seats regardless of who's on stage.
Oh yeah, I find the rule of thumb is 5 years. Companies, if they survive to 5 years and the 5th year is a success, hopefully that's good. It's our 5th year. But the first, knock on wood. I mean, the first time you put on your show, you know that your friends and family are gonna come. If it's good, maybe they'll come back. The second time you put on a show, your family is going to come. And it's like the third time, if you haven't developed and done audience development, people are going to stop coming, But that's my theory on it, at least. But again, could be another topic.
Seems pretty fair.
Yeah.
I have a thought I'd love to share, because that I find that this topic just sort of brings me to say, and we talk about, the contract between the audience and the choreographer and the work. And as a dance curator, I find what happens often is choreographers that want to challenge how pieces begin or how pieces end. So, for example, there's conventions in dance. At the end of a piece, the piece is over and the audience claps. And I find that it's often a challenge for a choreographer to figure out how do I end my piece to begin with? I mean, we've all been there, right? How do I end my piece? But then also, it's like, when I look at it, it's like, okay, so you've ended your piece. How does that relate to the audience? Do they know to clap? Is that important? If you have an audience that isn't used to going out to seeing shows, or maybe they go see theater and not dance, they're expecting, the big finale, the clapping. It's like, should you be giving your audience those conventional cues,
Blackout and applause and...
Yeah. I don't know. It's questions, and I find that with shows like Common Space, it comes up a lot, too. It's like, I'm going to fade out the music really slow, and then there's still going to be movement on stage when it's dark. And it's like, what message are you giving your audience when that happens? I'm not saying it's wrong, but Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious.
That brings up an interesting thought in my head, if I could voice it really quick.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're looking at the ending of a piece and you're not sure when it's ending, as an audience member, are you ready to clap? Are you not? You feel a little bit uncomfortable because you're not sure what the decorum is. You don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to interrupt. You don't want to be rude. You don't want... So what do? And what happens when you feel uncomfortable at a show? Do you go back to shows? So just to further your point, if there was a little bit of a format, or if something like that kind of developed, maybe it would become more accessible to people who are not typically, who feel a little bit uncomfortable or not. But what do I do? I've never been to a show like that. What do I do?
There are a couple ways to answer that, not definitively, of course, but one is there's always a plant.
Yes.
That's the simplest way, is that there's always a plant, or the choreographer is in the audience and they start the clapping. But also, there is some work that it finishes and everybody in the audience is literally kind of at a loss for words, because it's either, most of the time, it takes you back and you really sit with yourself, and then it feels right to begin the process of congratulations. But then also there are times where I've witnessed it, where somebody's just walked off stage and the lights are still up and they're off the stage and everybody's sitting in the house, and as the story was relayed to me, the dancer went back into the dressing room and the piece that was on after them said, "Oh, how'd it go?" He's like, "Oh, it went good. I think I'm going to go take a shower." And he went down and they were like, "But we didn't hear the audience clap." So
it's almost like he didn't give them permission to clap.
Yeah. So there's this idea of convention versus artistic satisfaction. If that's how he felt, he wanted to end his piece and then just leave it up totally in the air, that's another way of challenging the audience, because you're going to be challenged for X amount of minutes, not right up until the end and then we're going to let you know it's all good. There's this idea of pushing the entire piece for the entire length, even up until you go home, because maybe the piece isn't over. There's always that, it's like what's that grammar term, a dangling participle? That idea of just like, it's just kind of there.
I've seen a few pieces like that where I was gobsmacked because I did not know how to react to what was happening, and I have to tell you, in all honesty, I talk about those pieces the most now.
Yeah.
It's also the choreographer they have to understand their intentions at the end. In a way, they're setting you up. So walking off stage, she knew that quite possibly, people were not going to clap. So you kind of, can predict the reaction of audience members by the way you finish.
There are many kinds of audiences, and so the kind of audience in general that goes to see one choreographer doesn't go and see another choreographer's work. And I've been in audiences where I was one kind of audience member surrounded by other kinds of audience members, who had obviously connected with something, who sometimes people feel moved to respond while something's going on, and other kinds of choreographers set up a proposition that's like, no, you're sitting, I'm doing, this is what's happening. And for me, the question is I'm always desperately hoping that the kind of work that I want to continue to make is the kind of work that will develop an audience, they will find an audience. And so, because I don't want to alter my work to reflect an audience I want to have, so it comes right down to the way a piece begins or ends, do I want to challenge a convention? Because there are plenty of people, Dom, who love going to things and being super uncomfortable. Like there are all kinds of artists and artworks in visual art and music and all kinds of things who make stuff that makes people really uncomfortable, and they go back over and over and over. They pay $300 to go see a show like where they're expecting something disgusting to happen and they're excited about it. And so, like that's what they're excited for. And so
is it still disgusting if they're excited for it?
Are they still uncomfortable if they're enjoying it?
Well, that's it, right? And so, I mean, the question becomes, I saw, I think, Ainsi Parlait by Frédéric Gravel, and it's right in the middle of the piece, the lights all come up, and it seems like it's over, and there's a good, long, deeply weird pause, because whatever they've done to set up the piece makes you feel, and I was surrounded by like a collective feeling of this isn't quite right. This doesn't seem like the end. People are looking at each other, people are looking back out into the audience, and all of a sudden something starts up again. Mm-hmm. And we know, and so it's, to me, the craft of making dances for people to look at is, the intention, like, okay, is your intention to leave the stage and make people feel uncomfortable? Great. Set up a proposition that does that, and then see if it works, night in and night out. And see if an audience continues to come see your work next time you get programmed. Do you get programmed? Do you self-present and people show up that wouldn't otherwise show up? I don't know. I wonder if maybe the work of arts administrators in dance is not maybe to try and figure out how to connect the audience that wants to see something with the dancers that want to make it, as opposed to let's select the kinds of dances that our audience that we know, 18 to 35s, young professionals, like Scotch, they want to see this. So
yeah, that's a very practical solution for programming, which
right.
is something that is largely done in opera and theater,
right.
because they are programming for their audiences. What happens in contemporary dance, especially, is that there isn't the luxury of a built-in audience. So you can't dictate to the audience that isn't necessarily there. You kind of have to. It's far more artist-driven programming for contemporary dance, because of the fact that you don't have a built-in audience for a house for an entire season. The Centaur Theatre in Montreal has a built-in subscribership. So if they're going to do a Peter Hinton play, and they're going to do a Shakespeare, and they're going to do a Sidebar theatrical grocery production, they know that people are going to come see that because this audience already bought a bulk package of tickets, right? Mm. You're not buying season tickets to L'Agora. There's far too many shows, for that to happen. It would be expensive. But also, maybe I only want to see Wenwei and Crystal Pite. I don't necessarily want to see choreographer X from Tulipi, Mississippi, or wherever. Like, I'm not interested in that one. So it's harder to dictate to an audience.
But how do you decide that that's like this is where I'm at now, is that I have enough. Like, I know what I want to see, mm-hmm. but I don't know what anybody else wants to see. So I know how I decide, based on the 12 shows that L'Agora puts on, what I want to see in their season. But I don't know. I mean, that's the question I always want to, find programmers at 5 à 7 and ask them.
I think that artistic directors, when they bring in a company, it's because they really believe in that work. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's interesting, as somebody who's starting to bring in more work to mainline, not just in dance but in theater, and mainline starting to do more presentations, I'm finding it's they don't all work, mm-hmm. because it is hard to tell everybody else why I've booked this show, mm-hmm. and why I really believe in it. But it's if you're putting on a contemporary dance season, chances are that AD really believes in the work, and it's not just because they think it's going to sell a ticket, because it's probably not going
a lot of it has to do as well with the creation cycle.
Yeah.
Crystal Pite doesn't do a show every year. If she did, she'd sell out.
Yeah.
When she tours, she sells out. When Wade doesn't do a show every year. Rubber Band Dance doesn't do a show every year. But when they do create, they are packing the houses. Peanut Bouche sold out a year in advance. You know what I mean? Like that plays into programmation and audiences. There's a little bit of a deviation that plays into the whole role of the audience, but it's a very important point to speak about, because what if you know for a fact that there's one house that you just don't go see work at because they don't present anything that you want to watch? You will only go see work that's presented at this place because they bring in choreographers or that challenge you, or bring in choreographers that fit your aesthetic or what you think you should be watching, or things that stoke your own creative juices. That becomes a whole different audience relationship. Now we're jumping over the choreographer and going straight to the key holders, as it were, the people who are programming and dictating, well, this is the work that's being shown. Maybe that is something that we could touch on now, because ultimately, unless we're self-producing, and so we take out Bouge and we take out the Fringe Festival, everything else is pretty much programmed and dictated to us. So the idea of holding artistic directors accountable for their seasons, how do you choose where you go see? You know, is it based on the choreographers? Is it based on the themes that they're presenting in their season? Or do you only go because we're such a small community and you're supporting your friends?
Something that I think is maybe in parallel to that idea, or that way of finding what interests you, is that I'm constantly wondering about categorizing contemporary dance, because it's so broad. Like what Nicolas Quentin does and what Crystal Pite does are not the same at all. And if you like one, you're probably not going to like the other. But that's not, I don't know, but general
discussion.
Yeah. But, you know, and we're starting to get these languages and descriptions that you see over and over, where you start to relate, okay, if this says, you know, theatrical and absurdist, I know what kind of work I'm going for, and different language for different kinds of works. And is there wisdom in trying to all use the same kind of language to describe different types of contemporary dance, so that we can better match the audience to the work, so that they can appreciate it? And then there's also a negative side to that, absolutely, when the work is not categorizable, which is why they want to be contemporary dance in the first place. So go away.
I was going to say, language is so subjective. And I know it's not supposed to be. My boyfriend is an editor, and he always reminds me that words have specific meanings, but to me, language is so objective. Subjective. Ugh.
On the choreographic side, is it c'est une intention pour toi pour créer pour un directeur artistique spécifiquement, ou non? Is it more like you're creating your work, or if you know you're being programmed somewhere, do you lean your work towards that house or to that artistic director?
Je pense pas que c'est la bonne façon de rentrer dans le travail, mais je pense qu'il y en a qui peuvent le faire, là, mais je pense aussi en même temps que les directeurs sont de plus en plus en lien avec leur choix personnel ou leur choix... ça dépend lesquels, là, mais je veux dire, il y en a qui font le choix pour vendre, puis d'autres font le choix par intérêt personnel. Là. Puis s'ils le font par intérêt personnel, ben là tu sens que tu as une confiance, que là tu peux faire, tu sais, en fond, ce que tu as besoin de faire pour faire avancer ton travail. Mais d'aller dans un objectif de vente, là, des fois ça peut être castrant, en tout cas, pour le chorégraphe. Puis je pense pas que c'est une bonne façon de faire évoluer ton art personnellement, puis tout ça. Là, c'est là que tu t'en vas plus pour faire un musical ou des choses comme ça.
Je trouve en même temps, si tu es quelqu'un qui est capable vraiment bien décrire ton travail, on revient aux mots, mais si tu as les propres mots pour vraiment décrire qu'est-ce que tu fais, si c'est pas nécessairement quelque chose qui va en ligne avec un AD qui existe. Peut-être ils vont mieux comprendre puis être un peu plus ouverts. Mais, yeah.
C'est pas une qualité que tous les chorégraphes ont de bien décrire leur travail. Là.
Ouais.
Mais
ça devient un autre métier, genre, comme quand tu es chorégraphe indépendante, tu deviens la chorégraphe et
le producteur aussi.
Le producteur, c'est comme, tu as déjà fait une formation et tu as déjà fait le processus de travailler ton travail d'artiste. Et en plus, il faut d'écrire et d'écrire et d'écrire. Et non pas juste d'écrire de façon que tu penses qu'elle est honnête, mais d'écrire de façon qu'une personne particulière que tu ne connais pas va te comprendre. C'est ça que je trouve difficile.
That's why we hire grant writers.
Yeah. I also think that now that it's becoming more and more popular in North America, dramaturgy is what this gap bridges, and so they help the choreographer bring that to the ADs, and it's not necessarily the artist that has to justify themselves to those people, but you have someone in between, or people in between, that do those reflecting, writing, communication between the artists involved.
That's something that a larger company can do. That's not necessarily something that the choreographers around this table have the resources for. I mean, ultimately, that's what you would like. You would like to be able to create your work, and then you're there, and your people, the team takes it somewhere, and then you're programmed, and that team takes care of it, and then you're just insulated a little bit from it all because you need that space to create. But I mean, it's not necessarily a luxury that everybody has, but it would be great.
You should be able to talk about your work as a choreographer. You should be able to not necessarily explain and map it out for somebody, but you should be able to communicate into words what you are doing. I think that's fair. If you cannot communicate with your public, with your words, it's going to be a lot harder to communicate it through movement. How are you going to communicate with your production team? I think if you can't speak about it, then don't put it up yet. Mm-hmm. Make it, create it, let it build, let it simmer and soak, and then take the time to know how to express it with your words, because we don't all have PR people to do that for us. We don't all have dramaturgies. It's like, I don't know, I think if you're making it, you should know how to talk about it.
Est-ce que tu es avantagé parce que tu es plus en mesure de parler de ton travail qu'une autre personne, justement? Est-ce que ça va te donner en quoi, finalement, ça va être un avantage de pouvoir parler de son travail?
Moi, je trouve qu'il y a deux approches. Soit que tu es vraiment passionné de ton travail, puis ça parle pour soi-même. Mais dans ce cas-là, il faut avoir un environnement où est-ce que tu démontres ton œuvre, où tu sais comment parler avec le public. Parce qu'il faut vraiment... Tu peux parler avec le monde que tu veux, mais ça doit sortir dans le média pour que le monde vienne voir le show en grand nombre. Comme ça, de mon avis, il faut être capable de parler de son show. Ou avoir une équipe pour t'aider à se faire.
Je pense que si tu n'arrives pas à parler de ton travail, c'est qu'en quelque part, tu ne sais pas qu'est-ce que tu fais.
Oui.
Mais, par contre, il y a beaucoup de personnes qui savent parler de quelque chose qui n'est pas nécessairement ce qu'ils ont fait. Et moi, j'ai peur de faire ça. Et moi, je trouve ça aussi frustrant que là, ils parlent de quelque chose et on vient voir le spectacle, on est vraiment engagé avec ce nous avons parlé. Et là, je m'assois pendant 1 heure et je vois quelque chose qui n'était vraiment pas ce qu'ils ont décrit. Mm-hmm. Donc, et ils ont quand même un spectacle à l'Agora, donc, ou je sais pas, mais c'est comme... Ça aussi, je trouve difficile. Mm-hmm. C'est comme si on sait décrire ce qu'on a fait, oui, on a des avantages, mais c'est une autre façon. It's another way of diluting yourself. Also, I think in your process, you can talk until you're blue in the face, but if it's not on the stage, it's not on the stage.
Absolutely.
That's also. I mean, that's a really good point. It's also something that it could definitely become another whole discussion. At the moment, we have to let the public in for Bouge ici. This was great. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your thoughts and sticking it out for the first of hopefully many more symposiums. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Dirty Feet.
And thank you, Tim, for leading this awesome discussion, for spearheading this new wonderful experience for us. I love talking, so it's great. But just to say, thanks Katie Bélanger and Stéphanie Saucier for joining our conversation midway through, and Audrey Rochette, one of our Common Space choreographers, to make sure that people at the Vibrant Mainline Theater keep it down while we're recording. I think I want to do this again. We're going to do this again. It's going to be great. And merci tout le monde pour venir, pour partager. C'est bon. So, see you next time.
Yes.
Merci.
Yay!
Dirty Feet is recorded every week at the Montreal Improv Theatre. Check them out at montrealimprov.com.
Dirty Feet est produit et animé par,
produced and hosted by Allison Burns,
JD Papillon,
et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
You can find out more about our show at nomoreradio.com, follow us on Twitter at Dirty Feet, and find us on Facebook at Dirty Feet Podcast.
Vous pouvez écouter tous nos épisodes sur notre site web ou vous pouvez vous abonner également sur iTunes à notre podcast.
Listen to past episodes on website or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes.
While you're there, be sure to give us a rating and or leave a comment to help us spread the word.
Tune in next week for a whole new show.